Sport bikes and naked bikes are quite similar to each other, but they're also quite different at the same time. So if you're about to buy your first motorcycle and is wondering whether to buy a fully fed sports or a naked bike, I'm gonna share some ideas that will probably help you decide on which of these is better suited for your needs. Hello, namaste and welcome to my channel. This is Revin. Hope you all are doing well. So in this video I'll be talking about the pros and cons of both sports and naked sports category of motorcycles. If you're about to choose a motorbike, you might find something useful in this video, so do not skip and watch till the end. Now let me start by quickly talking about some of the similarities, and then I'll be going through the differences in detail. So before I begin, if you do not have an idea what sports or naked bikes are, they can easily be distinguished visually. A sport bike will have plastic fairings covering its engine and frames. Sport bikes have the ergonomics that is more suited for riding on tracks rather than on city roads. A naked bike does not have the fairing, that's why it's called naked, and usually a more upright posture and ergos more suited for city rides. I have a separate video on the basic types of motorcycles in the Nepalese market, so if you want to take a look at that, you can click on this link on top. Most of the sport bikes and naked sports are usually both packed on performance and are quite similar to each other if you compare them to other types of motorcycles. Both sports and naked bikes can be a lot of fun in the twisties, and you can indeed have a track day with any of them. Despite looking quite different, both of these motorcycles can even be constructed around the same frame design. But this is where the similarities end. Although they can be quite similar in certain aspects, they both shine in their own respective purpose. They both would get the job done for a lot of things, but a sport bike will do some of those things better than a naked bike, and there are some other things that a naked sport does better than a sports bike would. So let us now go through some of those differences, and lastly I'll be listing out some of the pros and cons of both naked sports and sport bikes. Sport bikes cost relatively more to purchase and to maintain as well. One of the things being that sport bikes usually perform at higher engine speeds and have a higher compression ratio, meaning that they need to withstand a lot more pressure inside the combustion chamber than in an engine with a lower compression ratio, thus requiring more durable materials for construction of engine parts that should be strong enough to withstand more abuse that comes along higher working temperature and pressure. High engine RPMs also mean it needs a better cooling system and better quality lubricants. I'll be making another video covering the working of a motorcycle engine. You'll see a link on the top and in the description if that video is already out by the time you're watching this. So if you want to know more about engines, be sure to hit that subscribe button and click on the bell to turn on notifications. So all those better parts, better cooling systems and better lubes add on to the cost of purchase and ownership of a sports bike. This does not mean naked bikes come cheap, but they are relatively less expensive than a sports bike in the same displacement range. So a 250cc naked sports is most likely to be cheaper than a 250cc sports bike. The engine of a sport bike is usually tuned to produce higher horsepower figures than a naked bike with a similar sized engine or even the same engine. But that amount of power only come up at higher end along the rev line, So typically a naked bike is most likely to be faster in a 0 to 60 km/h acceleration, but a sports bike will eventually overtake it in the long run. And I'm talking about both the bikes having a similar capacity of engines. You can't take one 250cc bike and compare it head-on to a 600cc superbike. Cooling and heat dissipation is much easier to obtain on a naked sport. The fairings on a sport bike can be restricting to the airflow. So the front is usually open so that the incoming air directly rams the radiator, but the escape is where it gets tricky. The air flowing through a radiator cannot escape as easily due to all the plastics covering up pretty much everything on either sides. So the radiator will not be able to properly cool itself due to the hot air trapped in the engine area. So a fairing should be constructed in a way that it will provide pathways for the air to exit easily. A restricted path of airflow will also provide greater resistance to wind at high speeds, and nobody wants that. So a lot of engineering goes into the design of the fairing. It should be suitable for cooling, provide the least wind resistance at high speeds, and should also look good. Or does it not matter to you? Okay, so if there's a sports bike that performs very well but looks totally ugly, would you still buy it? Mention what you think in the comments if the looks will or will not matter to you. On contrary, the fairing does make the sport bike heavier than a naked bike would be, but the slight reduction in power to weight ratio cannot outweigh the huge aerodynamic advantage in high speeds. Now let's talk about the ergonomics. Sport bikes provide an aggressive riding posture that is more suited for tracks. You'll be sitting higher up and further back. The rear set foot pegs with the lower set clip-ons will allow you to tuck into an aggressive stance, which makes it much easier to lean into corners at high speeds. But in the city and on long trips, it might not be a lot comfortable for most people. Especially if you're new to sport bikes, you could feel some pain on your wrist, back and butt after riding for a while in city traffic. In this regard, a naked bike seems to be more versatile. The ergos are suited to a wider variety of riders, and it's more comfortable in heavy traffic as well as for long rides. Now let's talk about some of the pros and cons of sport and naked bikes. And talking about pros and cons, what do you think of this video? If you're enjoying the video up to now, or if you have learned anything useful, a thumbs up would mean a lot, and your comments will help me make better contents for you in the future. So like the video and leave a comment if you have anything in mind. Okay, now let's first look at the pros and cons of a sports bike. Sports bikes usually have a very good acceleration, and the high revving engine wants to be constantly pushed harder, so the bike really seems at ease even when you're pushing to its limits. High speed stability is one of the great pros of owning a sports bike. There's a lot of aerodynamics that goes into the fairings, and this provides a great stability for the bike in high speeds. Also, the wheelbase, the weight distribution and that riding stance will provide you a great stability in corners. The ergos of a sport bike can be both pro and con depending on what you use it for. It can give you that huge advantage of better control and good aerodynamics if you're riding on the tracks or twisty roads in the mountains. The suspension can also be both a pro and con. Sport bikes have stiffer suspension setup that gives better stability during cornering and braking. The sleek and sexy styling of sport bikes definitely looks good and is appealing to a lot of eyes. Sport bikes will definitely turn a lot of heads in public. The ergos are more suited for track riding, so it can be uncomfortable for many riders in city or long rides. The stiff suspension is great for stability, but does not provide a lot of comfort on our bumpy roads. And lots of the impact from the wheels will reach you, and you will feel that in your wrist and butt after long hours of riding. Sport bikes are not usually a very comfortable place to be for a pillion. The high set rear foot pegs are really a tight space for your legs, and the pillion seat is usually not well cushioned, and the stiff suspension together might not feel great on your butt. Fairings are usually all plastic, of course with the exception of super expensive high-end bikes that come with carbon fiber fairings. but I hardly think any of you watching this video is about to buy one of those. So especially for learners, since the fairings cover almost half of the motorcycle, the fairings are very susceptible to damage if you drop your bike, and they'll be costly to replace as well. So a sports bike might be a bad choice if you're just learning to ride. Also, for experienced riders, I highly recommend putting frame sliders for safety for both the bike and yourself. The level of comfort on a naked bike is one of its main advantage over a sport bike. So they are much comfortable for city and long rides for both the rider as well as the pillion. Naked sports have a good low end torque than in a sport bike and requires less effort on the throttle for riding in city traffic. The low end torque also comes handy for off-road rides. A naked bike is usually cheaper than a similar capacity sports bike, so that's one advantage for most people. Naked bikes are usually much quicker to lean in and out of corners. The semi-sporty posture and wide handlebars means that it offers excellent maneuverability and are so much fun when filtering through traffic. A naked sport will provide a better off-roading experience than a sport bike would. They usually have softer suspension and a more upright posture, along with the wider handlebars, making them the more comfortable option if you want to travel off-road. There's a lesser chance of damaging the plastic components if you drop the bike in lower speeds, and many naked bikes can also be equipped with larger leg guards, and I highly recommend to use leg guards if you're learning to ride. Only the handlebar and the leg guards will come into contact with the ground in case of a drop. So a naked bike is much less likely to suffer a huge damage from a drop. The throttle also tends to be less sensitive than in a sports bike, so it's more beginner friendly, and that makes the naked bike a very good machine to learn on. Most of the bigger naked bikes have a beautiful muscular look with the big engine exposed and the visible frames. The beefy forks and the wider tires also add on the aggressive look of a naked bike. Naked bikes provide a lot of wind resistance when riding at high speeds. You'll definitely feel the wind pushing you back once you reach triple-digit speeds, and you'll find that loud wind noise to be quite irritating after riding for long hours. So relatively softer suspension on many smaller naked bikes are useful when riding through bumps and potholes, but it also means that they lose some of that stability in corners, and you will definitely feel the suspension acting a bit too much when braking hard. The ergonomics is not really a drawback, but it can matter for some people in some situations, especially in those times when you're cornering in high speeds and you want to lean forward and move your butt further back, and there's not enough space for you to slide back, and sometimes you might want the handlebar to sit lower for a more aggressive riding. So there's not a right or wrong choice to be told. It totally depends on your style of riding and your preference for looks and comfort. If you want to be focusing more on racing, want to take your bikes to the tracks, or have that bike that gives you more to learn about racing, you might want a sports bike. Or if you feel good when riding in a sporty posture, so it's also about the feel. So test ride both the types and see which feels better to ride. If you want the performance of a sports bike but also a more comfortable motorcycle, naked bikes can be a more practical option for you. It kind of does everything a sports bike would, but is less committed on those things and provides an all-rounder package. If you do not have an idea how to choose the right motorcycle, you can check out my video on the things you should consider when choosing your first motorcycle. Here's the link to that video on the top, or you can also check the description below. So last but not the least, if you're a new rider, naked bikes will be easier to learn on. They are more forgiving, but also gives you more space to go into. This does not mean you can't learn on a sport bike. You definitely can. And there are a lot of things you can learn and do on a naked bike that you could on a sports bike. So you can't go wrong with either of them. You just have to find out what your needs are and which motorcycle will suit you better. So that's it for today. If you're new to me and want to see more videos like this, subscribe to the channel and click the bell icon. If you have anything you'd like me to talk about, mention in the comments below. So until next time, stay home, stay safe, keep washing your hands, and thanks for watching.